Good evening and welcome to PJTN Online. I'm your host, Laurie Cardozo-Moore. Thank you for tuning in again with us this Wednesday evening. I want to welcome our new guests to the show, and I want you to know that this program is for our PJTN Watchmen and all of our Facebook friends. And it's an opportunity for us to talk about some of the news, the top news of the week as it relates to Israel, anti-Semitism, and also Christian persecution. I want to also mention that the mission, if you're not familiar with proclaiming justice to the nations, our mission is to educate Christians about their biblical responsibility to stand with our Jewish brethren and defend the state of Israel against the rise of anti-Semitism. And unfortunately, the ADL, the Anti-Defamation League, reported recently that there was an 86% increase in anti-Semitic incidents globally. And we have seen here in the United States a 70% increase, which is very disturbing. It's hard to imagine that we're living in 2018 and we would see the resurgence like what we saw with the rise of the Nazis in Germany. We accomplish our mission by producing award-winning documentary films to educate Christians about their biblical responsibility. These films and our programs focus on Israel shows, and this show, PJTN Online, are all produced with you in mind to equip you and to give you the information that you need to share with family and friends and to be informed and educated so that you can take action against anti-Semitism in your community. The films that we produce and the programming that we produce is broadcast through our 20 global media partners. Ladies and gentlemen, there are no organizations that I know of that are producing specific programs as it relates to Israel and then distributing them to 2.6 billion viewers. And that's how many viewers all of our combined global media partners reach. So when you're supporting PJTN, you're helping us to take this message across the globe to Christians all over the world. And we know every week we hear from people who are tuning into our programs from around the globe. We just heard this past week, I heard from someone in South Africa, a pastor in South Africa, who was amazed at the content and the information. He learned things that he didn't even know about Israel. And of course, we hear from people all over the globe. So I encourage you to visit our website at pjtn.org and become a PJTN Watchman, a partner. Partner with us for just $20 a month, and you can help us take this message to Christians around the world. I also want to just remind you, pjtn.org is the website. You can sign up there. Also share our website with your family and friends. It's important that we try to reach our family, our community, our friends, whether it's our church, whether it's our synagogues, our universities, our campuses. PJTN is a resource for you to help you reach more people in your community. I also want to mention that we just started airing our Focus on Israel program on Daystar Television that airs every Sunday night at 11 p.m. Central Time, 9 p.m. West Coast, on the West Coast, that's Pacific Time. And also you can tune into God TV, where our Focus on Israel show is also airing on God TV. All of our Focus on Israel programs deal with different topics, different issues to help, again, inform and provide you with information. You have to check your local listings for some of our other media partners around the world, so we hope that you'll tune in. And, of course, visit our website as well. I also want to encourage you to visit the events page on the website. That way you can stay informed about the upcoming events in PJTN. So if we're in your area, we'd love to see you. We've got several events coming up. Tonight, I just want to mention that at 8 o'clock Central Time, we are going to be co-sponsoring a conference call with Truth in Textbooks to discuss textbook training, a textbook training session on April 1st. Those of you who've been following PJTN, you know that we've been involved in exposing the anti-Semitic, anti-Israel, anti-Judeo-Christian, anti-West, anti-American rhetoric in our children's textbooks. Our children are being indoctrinated and propagandized with content that is causing them to support more socialist agendas. We saw with the last presidential election, 32% of millennials supported a socialist and avowed socialists. And that, ladies and gentlemen, can be directly attributed to the content in our textbooks. The secondary school campuses, these kids are being inundated with the propaganda. And then, of course, when they get to the university, that information is reinforced. So it's not surprising that we see that. But if you're interested in getting involved and helping us by reviewing textbooks in your community, you don't have to be a parent with a student in the school system in your community. If you are a tax-paying citizen, you have a vested interest in making sure that the content being taught to the children in your community is reinforcing the same Judeo-Christian principles, the same American values that you and I were raised with. The conference call, if you want to join tonight, again, it's 8 p.m. Central Time. You can call if you've got a pen and a piece of paper to take notes. The phone number it's a free conference call number, and it's 641-715-0632. That's 641-715-0632. The access code to that discussion is 326272. Again, the access code to join that call, that conference call, is 326272. February 13th, we're going to be in Florida. We've got 3 events in the month of February in Florida, in South Florida. Florida Atlantic University, we're going to be screening our award-winning documentary, Boycott This. Boycott This was produced for the millennial generation, and we used a satirical format to try to reach the younger generation, to entertain them as we educate them. So again, visit the website February 20th. I'll be speaking in Boca Raton at the America Connected event. And then February 27th, back at Florida Atlantic University, we are hosting a program called Arabs Breaking the Silence Tour. These are Arabs, both Muslims and Christians, who live in Israel, who have a different story than what we hear from the mainstream press, or from Mahmoud Abbas for that matter. So again, if you're in the area in South Florida, February 13th, 20th, or 27th, we invite you to join us. So you can go to our website, visit the events page. All the information is right there. And of course, March 1st, if you want to join us at our biggest media event of the year at the National Religious Broadcasters Convention, Proclaiming Justice to the Nations hosts our International Christian Prayer and Action event for Israel at the NRB. And we're going to be highlighting our new program called Igniting the Torch to the Next Generation. We are seeking out the up-and-coming generation of communication and media students, and we're preparing them and equipping them with the tools that they'll need, helping to groom them so that they can take our message to their peers. I also just want to mention that if you want more information, if you want to register to attend the NRB, again, visit our website at pjtn.org. And of course, you can also follow us on Facebook, like us on Facebook, share our page with your friends, follow us on Twitter and Instagram. We're right there. And stay in contact. I also want to just remind you, before we get into the topics for the day and we start our discussion, I will be taking questions, so please feel free to send me any questions that you have during the program. We would love to answer those questions for you, or if you have any comments you want to share with us, we would love to hear from you. So again, we'll be checking that shortly. So last week, moving into our program for this evening, last week we talked about Mahmoud Abbas's anti-Semitic rant and Pence's speech. Our topics tonight are going to include the increase in European anti-Semitism, the condemnation of Vice President Pence's tweet about the resurrection of the State of Israel, during his visit to Yad Vashem in honor of the International Holocaust Remembrance Day. And of course, I want to start out by talking about President Trump, who gave his State of the Union address last night. And of course, true to President Trump, he again spoke about Israel, about Jerusalem, about moving the embassy, the United States Embassy, from Tel Aviv, the financial capital of Israel, to the biblical, spiritual, eternal capital of Israel, Jerusalem. And I'm sure many of you tuned in to watch the speech, but he was again re-emphasizing his commitment and this administration's commitment to moving our embassy to Jerusalem. He asserted that the U.S. had a sovereign right to make that decision, and I know that you all have been informed and following what's been going on. President Trump was ostracized all over the world by world leaders for making this decision. And of course, we heard that loud and clear at the United Nations. Many of you also know that I serve as a special envoy for the World Council of Independent Christian Churches at the United Nations, and I can assure you that the animosity is still being felt in the halls. I was there earlier this week for meetings at the United Nations to talk about our upcoming conference on the BDS movement and to gain more support, sponsorship for this program. But President Trump stated last month, I also took an action endorsed unanimously by the Senate just months before. He recognized Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. Shortly afterwards, dozens of countries voted in the UN General Assembly against America's sovereign right to do so. In 2016, American taxpayers generously sent those same countries over $20 billion in aid. That is why tonight I am asking Congress to pass legislation to help ensure American foreign assistance dollars always serve American interests, and only to friends of America, not enemies of America. Mr. Trump's decision to officially recognize Jerusalem and announce his intention to move the U.S. Embassy there from Tel Aviv led to days of protests by Palestinian activists, resulting in a number of deaths. Ahead of the UN vote, the U.S. ambassador to the UN, Nikki Haley, warned she was taking names of countries who voted to condemn the recognition of Jerusalem as Israel's capital. A fact is, since its creation in 2006, the UN Human Rights Council has resolved more resolutions condemning Israel than on the rest of the world combined. The 45 resolutions comprise almost half of the country-specific resolutions passed. 128 countries voted in December against the move of the embassy to Jerusalem, almost two-thirds of the 193 member nations. Factoring in countries that abstained from voting, only 9 countries supported President Trump in the embassy move. The 8 nations that supported the move of the embassy were Guatemala, Honduras, Israel, Marshall Islands, Micronesia, Nauru, Palau, and Togo. So there, in a nutshell, are the countries that, just small countries, some little tiny islands in the South Pacific, but they stood and did what was right. And so we commend those countries. We also have seen an upsurge around the world, especially in Europe, of anti-Semitism. I want to talk about that right now. Politically here in the United States, in our Congress, Congressman Peter Roskam has put out a letter to lawmakers. He has, and I quote, he has asked co-chairs of the bipartisan task force for combating anti-Semitism, stating that they are alarmed by legislation recently passed by the parliament, or the lower house of the Parliament of Poland, that is awaiting consideration by their Senate that would criminalize references to Polish complicity in Nazi war crimes against Jews during the occupation of Poland during World War II. He went on to say that we are deeply concerned that this legislation could have a chilling effect on dialogue, scholarship, and accountability in Poland about the Holocaust. Should this legislation become law, additionally, it is highly troubling that this law was passed on International Holocaust Remembrance Day, a day on which the world speaks openly about the horrors of the Holocaust to ensure such atrocities never happen again. Unfortunately, ladies and gentlemen, this is another example, as we talked about the textbooks, we are witnessing revisionist history taking place all over the world, here in the United States, but also in Europe. And Poland is a great example. For Poland to remove or alter history by making it criminalizing, in fact, the references to Polish complicity in Nazi war crimes against Jews during the occupation of Poland could be punishable by imprisonment. And this is very dangerous because they're trying to change or say that to suggest that the Polish government or Poles were involved in the Holocaust is not an accurate portrayal of history. This is, again, it's a very dangerous trend to do that. It is documented, and we all know that there were many Poles who helped rescue Jews during the Holocaust. Unfortunately, we also know that there were many in Poland who did not help, who collaborated with the Nazis. One of the other concerns about the Polish government is that the concentration camps people are calling them Polish concentration camps. And although the Polish government did not create those concentration camps, they were created and built by the Nazis, by the extremists. They built these concentration camps. The Poles were still complicit by allowing this to take place. There were millions of Jews who were killed in Poland. People stood by and did nothing. I had a great conversation with a woman whose family is from Poland this past weekend in New York, and she shared her own personal story with me about her mother, how her mother was in a firing squad lined up to be executed, and in a last moment she turned to one of the German soldiers, broke ranks, and asked if she could relieve herself so she didn't have to do it in front of the people who were lined up. And he motioned to her to go ahead. She took off running, and she ran into a bakery in the town and hid behind one of the ovens in the bakery until the shooting stopped. And then she found her way to a Polish home, a Catholic home, where the family brought her in and took care of her. It's very frightening to hear these stories and very disturbing to hear these stories, but there are accounts of those who are from Poland who did protect the Jewish people, who did hide them at great risk to their own family. Yad Vashem has come out publicly condemning this. Again, this is an attempt, if we start rewriting history now and deciding that we don't like what was written about us then, where do we stop? Where do we draw the line in that? So it's another dangerous trend. There are leaders around the world who are following this very closely because this could be a very disastrous trend. Also, we had another incident recently that happened in France. We've seen an uptick in incidents, in anti-Semitic incidents in France, and the Prime Minister of France, Macron, condemned an anti-Semitic attack on a Jewish boy who's 8 years of age near Paris. And just for a little background, this 8-year-old Jewish boy was wearing a kippah and was attacked on Tuesday in the suburb of Paris. It was the second assault on Jewish children in the area in 3 weeks. Prosecutors said the two youth attacks the two youths attacked the boy while he was on his way to after-school tutoring on Tuesday, pushing him to the ground and beating him. According to the victim, the assailants were 15 years old. The French president condemned the incident, and he's quoted saying an 8-year-old boy was attacked today outside of Paris because he was wearing a kippah. Every time a citizen is attacked because of his age, his appearance or his religion, the whole country is being attacked. So it's interesting to see how the leadership in France are recognizing they have a tremendous problem. We know, I don't know if you have seen the movie Sarah's Key, and again, it's a story of a young girl who grew up to be a woman who survived the Holocaust and her journey through France. And if you haven't seen the movie, I encourage you to check it out and watch it. It's quite compelling, heartbreaking, in fact. Another incident happened on January 10th where a 15-year-old girl had her face slashed by an unidentified assailant, also outside of Paris. So these incidents are occurring more and more, citing the torching earlier in the month of 2 kosher shops in Créteil, another suburb of Paris, and the targeting of the same shops last month by individuals who painted swastikas on their facades. So again, it's a growing problem. The community where these incidents happen is known as Little Jerusalem, due to its large Jewish population. Of course, the community has been rocked by this anti-Jewish violence for some time now. So again, this is Europe, and we've seen this happening, but it's not just happening in Europe, it's happening in the United States. In Germany, there was an interview on a talk show in Germany where a 93-year-old survivor of Auschwitz stunned the viewers of one of Germany's most popular political talk shows on Sunday night. When asked to compare the Nazi era with the situation today, she asserted that the two periods had more in common than many people may care to admit. That's very disturbing. This is a woman who lived during the time of the Nazis' rise to power and the anti-Semitism, and she's witnessing it again today. We produced a documentary, The Forgotten People, Christianity and the Holocaust. Again, you can visit our website, visit the store page, and order a copy of the documentary film. And when we produced that documentary, I chose that film to be the first one because I couldn't understand how Germany, which was an educated Christian nation, could turn its back on the Jews. Surely the Christians in Germany knew the Bible. Surely they were in churches on Sunday and the pastors taught about God's covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob and their descendants. So it shocked me that this nation, this educated Christian nation, could give rise to the Nazis and support the Nazis and allow them to not just kill 6 million Jews, but another 5.5 million other people. Where was the church? And of course, I beg to ask that question now. Where's the church leadership? Where are the pastors? Where are the congregants today as we're watching this rise of anti-Semitism? And remember, Europe, there are still Christians in Europe. There's Christians here in the United States. Where is the outrage? She went on to say, I think that Germany was always anti-Semitic. That has not changed much. And she also mentioned that she was enslaved in the famous women's orchestra of the Auschwitz death camp. So she said the recent announcement, the article goes on to say the recent announcement of a federal commissioner to deal with anti-Semitism as part of a legislative program to deal with anti-Jewish hostility from both the German far right and from within the Muslim immigrant community is intended to be a major part of the government's counterattack. So even the government is recognizing in Germany that they have a growing problem, not just with the far right group, but with the immigrants, the Muslim immigrants who have come into Germany. They've tried countless times. I've read articles about how the German government, it takes people on tours, especially the immigrants, takes them on tours of these concentration camps that once existed. They share the story, they share the information, and unfortunately, it's not making a difference anymore. I've always said that people are not going to stop being anti-Semitic and stop persecuting the Jews because of what is politically expedient, because political winds change and views change. But if you can teach people biblically why they should be standing with Israel, remind them what the scriptures say about Israel and God's covenant with Israel, that you can have people, especially Christians, committed to protect and stand with their Jewish brethren for life. And that's really why we started proclaiming justice to the nations, why we use media, because media is the mechanism, the tool that we use to reach Christians around the world, to educate and inform them so that they'll understand what their role is and their responsibility. Moving on, in Haaretz, there was an article about Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who's condemning now the parliament in Ireland, because now Ireland is considering passing legislation to boycott, divest, and sanction products that are manufactured in the so-called settlement, or Judea and Samaria, the biblical heartland. When we were producing our documentary, Boycott This, we were actually at a Maya food plant, which is located in Judea, or in what the world calls the West Bank. And we interviewed a woman there who talked about her own personal support of the company being there and of Israel, because this is her livelihood. This is where she works. And if the world boycotts this company and the company has to move from this location, she said that her family would die, because there is no work in the Palestinian-controlled area, which is absolutely disturbing. We've given billions of dollars, world leaders from around the world since Oslo, billions, $31 billion. Where is this money gone? Why aren't we using the money to strengthen or build the infrastructure, build new housing for some of these Arabs who are living in squalor, who are still being kept in camps? You would be amazed, ladies and gentlemen, to stand on the hillside and look down into the Palestinian-controlled area, who have received, again, $31 billion, and they still have a camp there called the Balata camp. There are 3 generations of Arabs, so-called Palestinians, that they keep living in this squalor. Then you look over toward the left, and you can see all this land that's still part of the Palestinian-controlled area, and it's just sitting there vacant. Why don't they take the billions of dollars and build high-rise apartments and take these people out of the squalor of these camps, these so-called camps, and give these people dignity? Why don't they take the money and invest it in the economy to give these people jobs so that they have some dignity? Why don't they change the curriculum, the textbooks? Why don't they stop the children's programming that shows children attacking with knives, attacking a Jew? These are kindergarten programs like Sesame Street. But no, they continue to use the money to perpetuate these lies and this hatred from generation to generation. And so here we have Ireland, who's supposed to, again, be an educated country, and they're pushing a movement that will actually end up hurting the Arabs, because it's always the Arabs. It's the Arabs who are filling these jobs. So it's quite disturbing. I move on to South Africa. I mentioned earlier in the program that we had a pastor from South Africa contact us. He was so blown away with the program. He had watched Focus on Israel, and he wanted us to send him some information. But unfortunately, that pastor needs to talk to the head of the South Africa's Minister of Sports and Recreation, the Honorable Nixis, who is boycotting the upcoming Davis Cup Israel tennis match in South Africa. Of course, he believes that he stated that our own Human Sciences Research Council in 2009 produced a report documenting how Israel is practicing apartheid in the occupied Palestinian territories. There you have it, ladies and gentlemen. If you haven't been to Israel, I want to encourage you to consider taking a trip and going to see with your own eyes. I remember my first trip to Israel, having a background in media, and one of the things that I was frustrated with here in the West was watching the evening news and hearing Israelis speak and try to defend their country and their freedoms and their rights. And I asked the question to myself, why aren't they quoting the oldest historical document that we have with us, and that's the Bible? Why don't they tell the rest of the world, here's the evidence, here's the archaeology to prove it? But when I went to Israel for my first time and I saw the reality on the ground, when I went into Jewish communities and I saw the playgrounds and the children and the mothers pushing strollers with babies in them and flowers blooming and trees growing and beautiful neighborhoods. And then I went into the areas that were controlled by the Palestinian Authority, and everything was desolate. Everything was destroyed. There was no fresh foliage or flowers. It was totally an opposite setting. You could see the influence of the Jewish people on the land. And you know, the Lord said that when he brought his people back into the land, he said, I will sift you through a sieve, Israel, but not one kernel of you will fall to the ground. I will bring you back from the four corners of the earth, and the land will bloom. It will blossom. And we know, ladies and gentlemen, that the land does blossom. Wherever the Jews are in their country, you can see the greenery, the grass growing, the trees growing, the flowers blooming. You know, it reminds me of Gaza when Israel pulled the Jewish community out of Gaza, and the whole area went desolate. The earth wouldn't even respond. The land responds to a specific people group, and the evidence is right there in Israel. So I encourage you to consider making a trip, and God willing, PJTN is going to be taking one in the next year, and we'd love to have you on it. Moving on, I do want to talk about Vice President Pence made comments earlier this week when he visited Yad Vashem, and he and his wife paid their respects. And he made a comment about the Jews coming out of the Holocaust and being resurrected in their land, just as the prophets foretold, just as Isaiah foretold, and as is written in the Psalms that this would happen throughout the scriptures. And it was amazing to see the anti-Trump, anti-Pence rhetoric that came out condemning him for saying that. And of course, PJTN, we came out publicly supporting Vice President Pence's statement, because he was absolutely right on, recognizing that through this most horrific time in Jewish history, we had people who did survive, who came out of the ashes of the Holocaust, and they went back and they rebuilt that land. And again, you have to see it with your own eyes to believe it. And you know, when you're flying into Tel Aviv and you look out through the window in the plane and think, just 100 years ago, this was dirt, it was beaches, sandy beaches, and to see what has been created in 100 years, it is a miracle that only God could have accomplished. So it's very exciting. But we want to encourage Vice President Trump, or Vice President Pence, that we stand with him in his acknowledgement, his biblical. And, you know, if you watched his statement when he did speak before the Knesset, it was quite powerful and very encouraging to see an evangelical Christian leader, someone who represents our values, communicating the same values that you and I share about our beloved Jewish brethren and the state of Israel. I also just want to thank those of you who have written to us and who have tuned in. I did get 5 emails this past week from people who were who were on the Facebook last week, tuning into our Focus on Israel show. And Thank you so much for your words of encouragement and your comments. Before I go to our questions, I'm going to go ahead and refresh and get this ready to see what questions we have. Again, questions, comments about anything we've talked about, or if you want more information or more details, please feel free to comment. There's one. We will come to that in just a minute. But I want to just share some scriptures with you because, you know, I can come on this program and we can talk about all the issues facing Israel and our Jewish brethren and the rise of anti-Semitism. But we have to start with the foundation. We have to have a place, a basis to begin with. And, you know, as I said, many people support Israel because of what is politically expedient. But here at Proclaiming Justice to the Nations, we base our belief on the Word of God. God made a covenant with Abraham, with Isaac, with Jacob, and with their descendants, and that covenant is eternal. It is forever. It doesn't end in 2018. That covenant started in Genesis 12, and I want to just read a couple of scriptures to you to reinforce this promise, this covenant that was made. God said to Abraham in Genesis 12:3, and this is the first time he's mentioning this promise with Abraham. He tells Abraham, "Go for yourself from your land, from your relatives, and from your father's house to the land that I will show you. And I will make of you a great nation. I will bless you and make your name great, and you shall be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and him who curses you I will curse, and all the families of the earth shall bless themselves by you." If we were to read that in the Hebrew instead of the English, that scripture would be read as God told Abraham, "I will bless those who bless you, and he who ignores you I will utterly destroy." That is what God says about Israel and about the Jewish people. And if God calls Israel the apple of his eye, then Israel should be the apple of ours as well. He goes on to repeat that promise a second time. When God says something one time, he wants us to pay attention. He wants us to listen. But when he begins to repeat himself, he is wanting to reassure us, this is my position. In Genesis chapter 13, starting in verse 14, if you have your Bibles, turn to Genesis 13, verse 14. It says, "The Lord said to Abram, after Lot had parted from him, raise now your eyes and look out from where you are, northward, southward, eastward, and westward. For all the land you see, to you, Abraham, I will give it, and to you and to your descendants forever. I will make your offspring as the dust of the earth, so that if one can count the dust of the earth, then your offspring too can be counted. Arise, walk about the land from its length and its breadth, for to you I will give it." And Abram moved his tent and came and dwelled in the plains of Mamre, which are in Hebron, which the Arabs say belongs to them. And he built there an altar to the Lord. That's the second promise. You notice he talked about the land. He said, for all the land you see, he told him to look north, south, east, and west, and all the land you see, Abraham, I'm giving it to you, or Abram at that time. I'm giving it to you and your descendants forever. That covenant that Almighty God made with Abraham and his descendants, you cannot separate the land from the covenant. It is part of it. That covenant was reinforced again. If you turn to Genesis chapter 15, a third time, so I guess God is serious about this. He says in chapter 15, verse 4, he said, "Suddenly the word of the Lord came to him saying, that one will not inherit you." This is Abraham talking about Eliezer, his his servant, because Abram didn't have a son. And he said, only he that shall come forth from within you shall inherit you. And he took him outside and said, gaze now toward the heavens and count the stars if you are able to count them. And he said to him, so shall your offspring be. He said to him in verse 7, I am the Lord who brought you out of Ur to give you this land. Again, there's the land, to inherit it. He said, my Lord, Elohim, whereby shall I know that I am to inherit it? And God goes on to cut the deal. This is where God cuts the deal with Abraham. He puts him to sleep. He cuts the animals in half, and he passes his own presence, passes between those animals. And he said to Abram, know with certainty that your offspring shall be aliens in a land not their own, and they will serve them, and they will oppress them for 400 years. He was already prophesying about what was going to happen, that the Israelites were going to go into Egypt. He repeats again, this is the fourth time. On that day, the Lord made a covenant with Abram, saying, to your descendants have I given this land. Again, there's the land. From the river of Egypt to the great river, the Euphrates River, the Kenite, the Kenizzite, the Cadmonite, the Hittite, the Perizzite, and the Rephaim, the Amorite, the Canaanite, the Girgashite, and the Jebusite. All that land, that was all land, territory, given to Abram and his descendants. That's the promise. But God didn't stop there. That was the fourth promise. In the fifth promise, you'll find the fifth promise in chapter 17, verse 1, when Abram was 99 years old. The Lord appeared to Abram and said to him, I am El Shaddai. Walk before me and be perfect. I will set my covenant between me and you, and I will increase you most exceedingly. He went on to say again in verse 7 of chapter 17, I will ratify, seal my covenant between me and you, between your offspring after you, throughout their generations, as an everlasting covenant. Unfortunately, we see a resurgence of replacement theology and supersessionism in Christianity. And it's dangerous because it is replacement theology and supersessionism that is fueling anti-Semitism within the Christian church. You may wonder, the Christian church, Christians, anti-Semites? Absolutely. If you look throughout history for 2,000 years, Christians have persecuted the Jewish people. There were Christians who were involved in the pogroms. There were Christians who were involved in the Inquisition during the Holocaust. And by and large, we have a church around the world who stands by and allows this type of replacement theology, supersessionism to be taught, and it fuels the anti-Semitic views. It's why I believe many Christians turned a blind eye in Poland, in Germany, in France, throughout Europe, because they thought that the Jews deserved, because they rejected Jesus as the Messiah. God made a covenant. He made a promise to Israel, all 12 tribes. He would regather them and bring them back to their land. We are living in the most biblically historic time in history, the most prophetic time in history. And the fact that God allowed you and I to be alive at this time, that He didn't bring us into the world 500 years ago or 1,000 years ago. He brought us in now. He's watching to see what we are going to do. And so, ladies and gentlemen, I hope that you will prayerfully think about the conversation that we've had tonight and what you've learned. And I hope that you will read your Bible. Go back to the book of Genesis. Go back to the beginning and start reading from the beginning. And look, those first 11 chapters of the Bible are talk about God and His creation, when He spoke to Moses about how He created the world and how He created the nations of the world, the 70 nations, and He divided them up. But then, starting in Genesis chapter 12, You can read all the way to the end, chapter 22 of the book of Revelations, and that story from Genesis 12 to Revelation 22 is the story about God's covenant with Israel. And we, as Christians, were grafted into the commonwealth of Israel because of our faith in Jesus, in Yeshua as the Messiah. We have a responsibility to stand with our Jewish brethren. The sixth promise in chapter 17 again, in verse 17, and Abram threw himself upon his face and laughed, and he thought, shall a child be born to 100-year-old man? And this is where God told Abram that he was going to have, that the angels that he entertained were telling him that Sarah was going to be pregnant next year. Abraham said to God, oh, that Ishmael might live before you. And God said, nonetheless, your wife Sarah will bear you a son, and you shall call his name Isaac, and I will fulfill my covenant with him as an everlasting covenant for his offspring after him. There again, it's reinforcing that covenant, that commitment, a sixth time. The Bible is one of my favorite books to read because we see the truth. We see the evidence all right there for us. And so I want to encourage you to read this book. Take time in the morning when you arise to read a chapter or a few chapters of the Bible. Start back in Genesis and study these things and ask God to give you revelation to understand and help you to see the things that you didn't see before. You obviously understand this and know this, and that's why you're tuning in to our program. That's why you support PJTN, and we appreciate that support. But moving on, I know we're getting ready. We've got about 13 minutes left of the program, and I do want to take some questions. And so I want to encourage you, if you haven't responded, if you haven't sent us a question or a comment, let me see if I can refresh this and see what comes up. Okay, so we've got Kathy Johnson is back on with us. Welcome back, Kathy. It's great to see you. Thank you so much. She said, Amen. I will do as the Lord commanded. I will honor God, his land, and his covenant people. I will do this with love, and I will strive to be a blessing with my words and actions. I am gratefully grafted in. Thank you for reinforcing these important scriptures. Kathy, you know what? Thank you for encouraging me to read this beautiful comment that you have made about these truths. You know, God told Abram, I will bless those who bless you and curse him who curses you. And Kathy, you and your family have been an incredible blessing to Almighty God, and I know he's well pleased. I encourage you to continue your study and tuning in. And Kathy, I appreciate all the work you're doing. I have to tell you, Kathy is one of our supporters in Ohio, and she's very involved in her own community in introducing some legislation and raising awareness in the state of Ohio about the growing threat of anti-Semitism on our college campuses. Kathy is just one example, ladies and gentlemen, of taking the initiative, of being a watchman in your own community. PJTN is here to equip you and to inform you and give you the tools that you need to combat anti-Semitism in your community, but we can't do it without you. I know Kathy's going to be involved in reviewing textbooks. If you're watching this program tonight and you're not familiar with the textbook issue, again, I want to invite you to go back to the website, pjtn.org. There's information there where you can just browse through to see some of the content that is being taught to our children. If you have children or grandchildren in the public school system or even in the private school, because private schools are also purchasing a lot of the curriculum textbooks that are being used in public schools to save money. But if you bring home the history, the geography, the social studies textbooks, and just turn to the sections that deal with the Middle East or deal with the comparative religion section, you'll see some of the outrageous comments that are made. And it all started with one mom here in Williamson County who, of course, Williamson County, Tennessee, where we're headquartered, is the belt buckle of the Bible Belt. And you wouldn't think that you would find, in an evangelical Christian community, you wouldn't think that you'd find anti-Semitic content in our textbooks. But it was one mother whose son came home from school one day questioning the authenticity of the Bible, asking his mother who had legal rights to the land of Israel. And of course, the day that he came home from school to ask this question was November 29th, which the Arab world calls Nakba Day. And it's the day that, that the United Nations voted to partition the land and establish a Jewish state. And unfortunately, the teacher, who is not very knowledgeable about the Middle East and the ongoing struggle that's been going on, so she invited a friend who has been to the Middle East 5 times, and she assumed that he was an expert on Middle East studies, and unfortunately misled her son, gave them handouts and instructional materials. The handout had no documented source cited on the Israeli side to answer for her son to research, to find information as he was going to be writing a paper. But the mother looked at the textbook, and when she found a quote in a human geography textbook published by Pearson Publishers, the quote basically legitimized Palestinians blowing themselves up in a Jerusalem restaurant because they were waging a war against Israeli government policies and army actions. This is outrageous. And of course, we launched a media campaign locally to expose this content because we knew that the parents in our community, the citizens, would be outraged knowing that this is the type of propaganda being used to educate their children. And we were right. We were able to mobilize the community. We had 2,000 signatures signed within a week that we presented to the school board. The school board refused to remove the textbook. It was our state legislature that came to the rescue, thank God. And after our legislators saw the content in the textbooks, not just anti-Semitic, but anti-American, anti-Judeo-Christian, anti-West, pro-Islamic, it was the legislature that took action. They abolished the textbook commission that approved the textbook. They established a new commission with more transparency, more accountability, bringing in parents and citizens from across the state to review the textbooks so that the textbooks would have fair review, that parents would be aware of what was being taught to their children. And it forced the state of Tennessee to actually review the standards being used in Tennessee before the time was up. So it was huge, but Fox News, as a result of all the media attention that we were getting here in Tennessee, Fox News picked up the story and ran with it. And that's when we started hearing from people like Kathy. And so it's important that we stay informed and educated if we don't take back action. You know, the Lord gave me a great strategy I'll share with you tonight in our closing moments. And again, I would love to hear from you all who are tuning in tonight. Any more comments or thoughts? Maybe you have already been looking at textbooks in your community and you want to share that information with us. I'd love to hear from you. And if you're interested, if you're a parent or a citizen interested in reviewing textbooks in your community, we would still love to hear from you. We'd be happy to, again, help you. Again, for those of you who are on tonight that are interested in learning more about the textbook review process that we've got coming up April 1st, I want to encourage you to join us tonight. And you can certainly email us at comments@pjtn.org to learn how you can get involved. But as a result of doing the work, the Lord said to me, He reminded me of Nehemiah when Nehemiah was given the authority by Cyrus to go back and rebuild the walls of Jerusalem that had been torn down. And Nehemiah went and assessed the damage. You can go back and you can read the book of Nehemiah. It's a great encouragement to those of us who are fighting the battle. But he went and assessed the damage, and he went to leaders in front of who lived in districts in front of sections of the wall, and then he went to people who lived in front of other sections of the wall around Jerusalem, and he convinced all of them to just rebuild their section of the wall. And the Lord said that as you go and travel across the country, state by state, county by county, He said, tell the people to rebuild the wall in their community. That wall is your county, and you have to start from the foundation. The foundation is the school board, because the school board, the superintendent, as well as the school board members, have control of our future, our children. And if you have ever considered running for school board or maybe attending school board meetings to learn more about what is being taught and communicated to your children, again, even if you don't have children in the system, maybe your kids are raised, but you are still a tax-paying citizen. You have a vested interest, and you have a responsibility as an American to make sure that we are turning the country over, that we're handing over this constitutional republic, safeguarding it for future generations. That's our responsibility. The other part of that is to make sure that our children are educated and they're informed and they're able to take this constitutional republic from us when it's time to pass that torch. So we've got 4 minutes left, and I don't see any more. Let me just look and see. I'm going to just refresh this again and see if we've got. Okay. We do have, how can I become a PJTN Watchman? Well, thank you for asking. The way you can become a PJTN Watchman, partner with PJTN in our mission and help us with programming like this, is to go to our website at pjtn.org. Sign up to become a monthly donor for just $20 a month. That's 4 cups of coffee. You can help by partnering with us and financially supporting this effort so we can continue to reach more Christians around the world. Go to PJTN. Oh, yes, absolutely. So we just had a question about the textbook. And the call, you can go to pjtn.org if you're interested in learning more about how you can review textbooks in your community. There's no commitment, no obligation if you just want some information. Here's a question: will you be back in Israel anytime soon? Absolutely. I'm going back in March. I'll be attending the Israeli government's 6th annual forum on global anti-Semitism. So I'm looking forward to reporting back to you when we'll be reporting live from Israel. That'll be March 15th, actually March 18th through the 22nd, but we'll be there March 15th through the 30th. We'll be filming, doing more interviews, and bringing all of that great information back to you to help equip you. And the last question I have here is, how can I find Focus on Israel program on TV? Well, if you've got DirecTV or any type of cable or satellite, check your listings. Look for God TV or Daystar. Again, Daystar, our Focus on Israel show, broadcasts on Sunday evenings, 11 p.m. Central and 9 p.m. Pacific. And then God TV, they air Focus on Israel on Mondays. So again, check your local listings and see, look for Daystar, God TV. There are many others. Go to the website. You'll see all of our media partners there, and you can see who's broadcasting in your community or through your satellite, and you can absolutely tune in. We'd love to have you. I'm going to look and see if there's any last question, comment before we go. I think we are wrapping it up. So it is just 1 minute away. Again, in my closing comments, please visit us at pjtn.org. Sign up, become a monthly partner, just $20 a month to support what we're doing here. And we appreciate you tuning in, and we're looking forward to having you next week. So same time, same place, Wednesday evening, 6 p.m. Central, right here on PJTN Online. I'm Lori Cardoza-Moore. God bless you for tuning in. God bless you for all you do on behalf of our Jewish brethren and the state of Israel. I look forward to seeing you next week on PJTN Online. Shalom.